So, can you actually use math to prove a miracle? I know, it sounds kind of like sci-fi, right? But a philosopher actually argued you can. He took a famous statistical tool, Bayes' theorem, and used it to calculate the probability of one of the most famous events in all of history. So, in this explainer, we're going to walk through exactly how he did it, step by step. I mean, it sounds impossible, right? How would you even begin to calculate the odds of a one-time miraculous event from ancient history? Well, philosopher Richard Swinburne did just that. He took this cold, hard logic and pointed it straight at the resurrection of Jesus. Now look, we're not here to debate it. We're just going to follow his math step by step to see how on earth he got to his final number. First up, let's talk about the tool he used. Okay, so the tool at the absolute heart of this whole thing is called Bayes' theorem. And don't let the fancy name scare you off. It's actually super intuitive. The idea is simple. You have an initial belief about something, then you get some new evidence, and the theorem just gives you a logical way to update your belief. Think about a doctor. They might have a hunch about what's wrong, but then the lab results come in, that's the new evidence, and they update their diagnosis. That's it. And believe it or not, we're about to use that exact same logic on a miracle.
All right, so here's the game plan. We're going to start by setting our initial odds, the priors as they're called. Then we'll bring in the life of Jesus as our first big piece of evidence. After that, we'll weigh the specific historical evidence for the resurrection itself. And finally, we'll put it all together to get our final probability and talk about, what it all means.
All right, first things first. Before we even crack open a history book or look at any text about Jesus, Bayes' theorem says we have to set our prior probabilities. Think of these as our starting assumptions, the baseline odds we're working with based only on really general big picture knowledge about the universe.
So, the very first number we need for this formula is, well, it's about as big a question as you can ask. What's the probability that God, any kind of God, even exists? And what's really important here is that Swinburne isn't pulling this from any specific holy book. He's asking a question of what's called natural theology. Basically, what can we figure out just by looking at the universe around us?
And the number he lands on? About 0.5. A 50-50 shot. Literally a coin toss. Now, this is the bedrock for the entire calculation that follows. So you've got to be asking, why 50-50? So where does he get this 50-50 number? Well, here's his reasoning. He argues that if you take all the arguments for the existence of a creator, stuff like the incredible order of the universe, the fact that we're conscious beings, and you put them on a scale against all the arguments against it, they pretty much balance out. Now, look, that's a huge philosophical claim for sure, but that's the logic he uses to set our starting baseline at 50%. Okay, but he doesn't stop there. Swinburne adds a second starting probability. He asks, okay, if God exists, what are the odds that this God would want to become human, an incarnation? And again, he lands on 0.5, another 50-50 chance, arguing God would have some pretty powerful reasons to do just that. So let's do the math here. You take the 50% chance that God exists, and you multiply it by the 50% chance God would become incarnate, and what do you get? You get 0.25, a 1 in 4 chance. And that's our real starting point, before we've even looked at Jesus specifically. Okay, now things get interesting. We've got our abstract, 1 in 4 chance of an incarnation. Now it's time to introduce our first huge piece of new evidence, the life of the historical Jesus of Nazareth. And let me tell you, this is where the numbers really start to move. And wow, check this out. This is the power of Bayes' theorem in action. According to Swinburne's argument, the probability that Jesus was this incarnation, it rockets from just 25% all the way up to 83%. That's a massive jump. So what on earth, what specific evidence from his life could make the probability leap that high? Okay, so here's the thinking. Swinburne basically says that the details of Jesus' life just fit the profile of an incarnation really, really well. Think about it. His teachings and moral character, his claims about having divine authority, his ideas about atonement, and the fact that he founded a church that's lasted for 2,000 years. The argument is that all of this stuff is way more likely to have happened if he was God incarnate than if he wasn't. It's that whole package deal that gives the probabilities such a massive boost in the formula. All right, so let's recap. Following this model, we're now sitting at an 83% probability that Jesus was an incarnation. But we're not done. Now we add the final crucial layer of evidence, the specific historical claims about what happened after he died. We're talking about the empty tomb, the appearances, and how his disciples completely changed. And this is where a concept called explanatory power becomes
absolutely critical. The argument goes like this. The resurrection is a really strong hypothesis because it explains all the weird facts with one single story. It explains the empty tomb, it explains why so many people claim to see him alive, and it explains why his terrified disciples suddenly became fearless preachers. Now think about the other theories, like maybe it was a mass hallucination, or someone stole the body. Swinburne's point is that those might explain one piece of the puzzle, but they just can't explain all of them together like the resurrection hypothesis can.
So the big question is, just how much better is this explanation? Well, according to Swinburne's math, the evidence we have is not just a little more likely if the resurrection is true. We're talking thousands of times more likely. In the world of Bayes' theorem, this is what's known as the likelihood ratio, and it's basically a giant amplifier that's about to be applied to our final number. All right, here we go. We've got all the pieces. We have our starting odds about God and incarnation. We updated those odds with the evidence from Jesus' life. And now we have this massive amplifier from the historical evidence. It's time to put it all into the formula and see what comes out.
Okay, this is it. This is the moment we've been building up to. After we combine our starting beliefs with all the evidence from Jesus' life and the historical data, what is the final number? What is the probability that the resurrection really happened?
The final answer, according to Swinburne's argument, is 97%. Just let that sink in for a second. 97%. That's an absolutely astonishing number. What it suggests is that if you go along with his starting assumptions, the resurrection isn't just a possibility. It's mathematically overwhelmingly probable. So let's just run that back one more time really quick. We started with two 50-50 bets, which gave us a 1 in 4 starting chance. Then the evidence from Jesus' life bumped that all the way up to 83%. And finally, we hit that 83% with the massive amplifier from the historical evidence to land at our final number, 97%. Okay, so we have our number, 97%. But let's zoom out for a second. Let's ask the really big question here. What does a number from a math formula really mean when we're talking about something that, for millions of people, is the ultimate act of faith? Really, what this whole exercise shows is just how powerful the Bayesian way of thinking can be. You can start with a few assumptions that on their own seem pretty reasonable, or at least, debatable, like that 50-50 coin toss for God's existence. But when you start stacking them up, and then you multiply them by evidence that's really, really good at explaining the facts, you can end up with a final number that's surprisingly, even shockingly high. At the end of the day, what Swinburne's argument really does is offer a framework, a way of looking at belief as something that can be mathematically rational. It's like he's trying to build a bridge between faith and pure reason. But it leaves us with a pretty profound question, doesn't it? Can a formula, no matter how neat and tidy, ever truly capture the nature of belief? Or is it just giving us a new set of tools, a new language, to talk about one of the oldest mysteries? That's a question the numbers just can't answer for you.